Good morning, good morning, good morning. It is Coach Candy here with Coffee Chats. Tuesday morning, y'all, and I am back right side up. I know yesterday I was a little reversed due to some technology issues. So I am back, I am right side up, and here we go. Grab your coffee, grab your tea, grab your water, grab your juice, grab your drink, whatever it is that gets you up and going in the morning. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning. Hey, Yvette, how you doing, girl? Um, Welcome. We're going to have a good conversation today. I actually was reading an article last night. Actually, I had kind of an epiphany. Something dropped in, and it was one of those things. And just a second, say a prayer. Oh, there's always sirens go by. We say a prayer. I had a thought last night, and something showed up. I forget what it was, and I started going through Good Morning, Terry, and I found that a couple articles that really got into the effects of labeling, and whether they actually serve, whether they're damaging, things around that space. Good morning, Preston. So I wanted to get into conversation this morning. I wanted to talk about. We know that there's certain labels out there that obviously are damaging, but are there any positive effects, and is there any way that labels serve? And I have my own opinions about this, but I actually want to open this up for discussion this morning. Good morning, Shirley, because I find, and especially in doing more and more research about fixed mindset versus a growth mindset and what that really looks like. And we've got some sirens going on, so everybody say a prayer. Fire truck going by. Say a prayer. Okay, thank you. So I want to talk about the effects of labels, and more specifically in your everyday language and in your conversation with your kids, with your teammates, with things that are out there. I want to talk about what effects show up and how oftentimes it puts us into a fixed mindset. There is a space, it's human nature. We judge by nature. It's human condition, right? We see something, we make an assessment of it, and oftentimes, we're making that judgment based on filters, experiences, programming, things we believe, whether we even know we believe it. We make instant assessments around things. We make judgments around things. And I know, we have a lot of filters and labels where it comes to race and gender and sexuality and those kinds of labels I want to talk about, as well as the labels that we put on people that are more qualifiers of how we think, who we think they are, what we think their personality is, what skills they have or not. So let me give you an example for a minute. I want you to think about, and even think about how you were raised. And I get this, where there was massive labels in my family. I was the smart one, my sister was the pretty one, and my brother was the quiet one. And those were labels that were put on us from a very early age. And what happens is when you start to put those labels out there, it starts to create a fixed mindset that oftentimes we attach to and think, well, that's just who I am, right? I can't change that. That's who I am. Well, I guess I'll never be this way because I've always been told I've been this. And so I want to really explore with you guys, good morning, Deborah, explore where and how you see labels showing up. And here's the interesting thing about it. And there was a really powerful article I was reading yesterday that I agreed with deeply. And it was the space of, it makes us as individuals feel safe when we can put a container around something, when we can label something, when we can oftentimes put it in a box to make it make sense, right? And I think about people that have tried to put me in a box my whole life, right? And I make people crazy because I don't fit in a box. I think about, good morning, Herbie. I even think about when I was in high school. And, we had there's a lot of labels in school, right? And so we had the smart kids or the athletes. We had the popular kids. We had the Kirby's. We had there was like a label for every kind of classification of how somebody looked or how they acted. And I remember getting a lot of feedback. I'll just say that. Feedback. Buenos dias, Herbie Harris. You realize you're one of the only people that can call me Candace. I'm just putting that out there. Anyway, you think about that. And I remember getting a lot of feedback and actually a lot of crap in high school because people were like, I can't believe you hang out with that group. Because I kind of was one of those people I still have in my life. I don't believe I belong in any specific group. I've never been attached to a specific label or have tried not to be. And so people are like, I don't understand how you can hang out with this group and hang out with that group. And sometimes it was almost like I needed to decide. And I felt really I always found that to be interesting. And I love to study human behavior. I love to study sociology. I love to study, yeah, the Super Bowl of labels, right? That absolutely. And especially as I find the smaller the town, the bigger the labels. The smaller the container you're playing in. I found the same thing in college. I went to a private engineering school. And it was amazing to me how there were just these cliques, right? And I feel like, I mean, there's cliques everywhere. So cliques come from that label in itself. And I think sometimes the smaller the container, the bigger and more powerful the labels, because they become more of a space where people feel ostracized, more of a space where people feel like they are stuck in a space that defines them, that oftentimes isn't anything about who they are. And so what's Deborah said, I'm the same way. I don't hang with any one group of people. Yeah, I never have, and I've gotten a lot of grief and a lot of slack for that over my life. I hang out with everyone, talk to everyone. Yeah, this is why you guys are my people. And I even think about one of my guidance counselors, and I know I mentioned this before. I really struggled with one of my guidance counselors, and I will not say his name, but struggled with one of my guidance counselors in high school who truly kept trying to put me in a box. And it started with when I wanted to take shop class, and I was taking 4 honors classes. He's like, but you're an honors student. Honors students don't take shop classes. And I remember looking at him and going, why? I want to use my hands. I want to use a different side of my brain. I love this stuff. I want to do some woodworking and metals, and I want to get into something that speaks to me on a different level. And doesn't that make me a more well-versed student and a more well-versed learner? And he kept saying, but you're an honor student. And I'm like, yes, and I'm also someone who likes to get dirty and practical, and I want to be a worker, and I like to do things. I like to create and build. And we fought so much around the fact that he said, but you're an honors student. And I kept saying, I get that, and just because I take some honors classes doesn't classify who I am and what is meaningful for me. And I think about that, and that was always one of those spaces. Good morning, Robin. It's a boutique engineering school. You can call it a boutique engineering school. I just call it a private engineering school. And it was a small pond, Herbie, you know that. And there were some big old cliques in that small pond. A boutique engineering school, I love that. Speaking of classifications and labels, see right there, labels matter, because someone's, rather than saying it's a small private school, you want to call it a boutique school. It sounds better, it has more appeal, right? And so when we think about the power of labels, we create labels because it feels safe for us to identify what something is, right? We have a lot of programming that's been handed down. I think about my main vision for the work that I do. It's that together, all of us, as we step into a space to lead from love with love, to lead with purpose, to show up and take ownership of that, right? And serve in our gifts. I feel as if our role is to eradicate this cycle of fear that keeps being handed down. And a lot of that has to do with the labels and the judgment we create that oftentimes aren't even our own belief. My family, I have half my family is Italian. And you ever wanted to meet people that like to put labels on things, which never made sense to me. It never made sense to me when, over the course of history, there's spaces where Italians were the last person that people wanted at the table. They actually used words that meant dirty man and space of that, right? And so I never understood why we feel so insistent to put labels on everything, to put everybody in a box. And it was interesting because this article talked about from a survival standpoint, from a safety standpoint, we do it because it feels like we can put something in a container and we can then control it. We can have a sense of how somebody's going to react in that space. And that's where, if you think about stereotypes and generalities and what we think we expect and how we think someone should show up, we oftentimes miss opportunities to really see people, to really lean in and listen, because we make an assumption based on a label. Oh, they're smart. Oh, they're not. Oh, they're lazy. Oh, they're this. And I mean, don't even get me started on the bigger labels that are all about gender and race and sexuality among, economic status, among different things. We think oftentimes, and based on a label, we then have a series of labels that is connected to that, where we start to create a sense of our own knowing and belief, and we show up differently with those people because we have an expectation of how we think they should show up, or based on whatever we've been told or whatever we have as programming, we just know that's what they're going to do. And it's such a limiting space. I think about when we talk about fixed versus growth mindset, talk about the ultimate fixed mindset and think about what we do to our kids, right? And so before I get into that, I want to see, you guys are blowing up the feed, which I love this. Like I said, I wanted to get into a conversation this morning because it's something that just hit me again last night, that I was like, man, labels are these, just in my opinion, I think labels are so damaging. And I've been much more mindful because I realize I'm just like anybody else. I have some of those snap judgments and instantly I'm like, oh, there. And I'm like, wait a minute, you don't even know that person. You've never had a conversation. And let me see what you guys said, because I want to also share with you, there was an incredible advertisement that was done that I want to talk about in just a minute as well. Yvette, I didn't get exposed to labels until going to school. I don't remember my parents using labels. See, I can honestly say I was exposed to labels from the minute I was born. Like I said, it's amazing to me how racial conversations could be in my family, how judgmental things could be in my family. There was a label for everything. And my dad was like the epitome. And by the way, narcissists love labels on things, and they're really good at manipulating in that space. So I grew up hearing all these labels that didn't make sense to me. In fact, even at my grandfather's funeral, I was 16 and my family was getting into a space of a lot of labels and a lot of judgment. And I remember standing up, I think I might have shared this before, and my mom's like, Candy, take a walk around the block. Mind you, this was in Philadelphia, and it was like in a suburb in King of Prussia, and the block was like a freaking mile long. It was a long block. And my mom was like, go take a walk. I'm like, no, I want to say something right now. I don't understand how everybody's having it. She's like, go take a walk. And I'd come back in, and I was still huffing and puffing and like ready to like share my insight. And she'd be like, take another walk. I think she made me walk around the block like 8 times until I was completely exhausted. And she's like, okay. She's like, this is not the space to have a conversation, because I felt like there was a need to have a more justice conversation because I couldn't stand the labels in the conversation that was going on. And so, oh, I love that, Jerry. Labels are made for canned goods, so you don't mistake the spinach for the peas. Oh my God, that is a Girl Scout song. But don't put labels on my friends. Girl Scout song I learned in 3rd grade. I love that. Think about that. Labels are great when you have canned goods. Good morning, Robin. Yes, comfort zone, right? There's a huge comfort zone. There's a place where we isolate ourselves and protect ourselves because we start to then make sure that all the peas are together and all the spinach is together. And we look at people and we instantly say, oh, you're my person, you're not my person. And there's a label and there's a judgment and a filter instead of really getting to dig deep and understanding. Good morning, Martha. Most damning labels in our culture right now, Democrat or Republican. Absolutely. Our political labels are crazy. Our racial, our like charged up religious labels are really damaging. We say one religion's better than another and, oh, you're this, so therefore you can't be this. And it's amazing to me how further polarized we make ourselves when we put these labels out there, right? And I think about any label and personally, and I know some of you may get charged up with this, and I'm okay with that because this is my belief. I even think labels that are about, you know, non-groups, lives matter, or me too, or whatever, start to further isolate people too, because it puts people in a box that says we are, because anytime you put a label around something, you're putting a box or a container around it, which says us versus them. And I believe truly that we're missing some of the value of the conversation by stripping those labels away and truly meeting people where they're at. And Yvette, I know that I got labeled because of my gender and color. People have certain expectations on that. Absolutely, right? Good morning, Carol. And so I think about those labels and how limiting they can be. And what was interesting is there was a commercial done by we've got a lot of sirens going on. Say some prayers. Wow, lots of sirens this morning. Something's going on. Everybody pray, because now we've got an ambulance and some an EMS. So lots of sirens right now this morning. So if somebody's in distress, we say a prayer for them. And so, Yvette, but I will let everyone else spend their time putting people in boxes. I don't have time for that. I have awesome people to meet and wonderful experiences to have. Absolutely. And like I was saying, there was this incredible, I forget the name of the beer. It was, a European beer, and they did a commercial where they put people's pictures up, just an image, and they had someone that was all tatted up. They had someone who had a short haircut like mine. They had a guy who had a big beard and was really serious. And what they did is they invited different people to come up and put Post-its on the image of what they felt this person represented. And so, like, for example, the tatted up person, they said dangerous. They said street person. They said, I mean, they wrote words like dirty. They wrote words, I mean, all these labels, and they just kind of like put whatever came to mind when they saw the image of the person standing in front of them. And for the guy that was serious with a beard, they're like biker, they're like criminal, they're like this. For, you know, they put up people of different nationalities and color, and they had words. They put up someone whose hair was mine, they're like butch, they're like whatever. And they put up all these different labels. And it was really powerful just in that, just to watch the labels that went up in the Post-its. But what was more interesting was then they brought in the people, they brought in the person whose picture it was with the people that put the labels on them. And they got to sit down and talk to each other. And it's one that really made me emotional when I watched it, because there was such a healing. Because as they started to talk, when that person, they had to take down the Post-its. I'm going to get really emotional on this, because I think about how damaging labels are in our culture, in our households, in our language and everyday conversations. I think about where I have violated or been guilty of not being mindful of the labels that I'm putting on things. Like I said, it is human nature, and there's a space of safety and survival that we create based on the programming and the beliefs that we've been handed down, the things that we've seen, the things that we've experienced. We create these filters. And so I, like anybody else, I've been guilty of putting labels on things inadvertently and having to check myself, because I think about how damning that is. I think about sometimes when I don't go approach somebody because I've got a mindset of something, how much I'm missing an opportunity to create that deeper level connection. And so they had these individuals connect on a level where they talked about what it felt like to have those labels put on them. And, you know, they had someone with glasses that were like, she's smart, she's this, she's like, and that's all I'm ever seen as. I don't get to be seen as someone who's fun or playful. And I think about what we do to our kids, right? We tell a young girl, oh, you're so pretty. And we comment and think about how the majority of our culture speaks to a young boy or young girl. They ask a young girl, oh, you look so pretty, your dress is so pretty. We say these things, and so they're constantly focused on how they look, because we're constantly putting a label in terms of, we ask them, we talk about those kinds of things. With a boy, we talk about, what are they doing? What are they playing? How are they? And so they start to create filters about, I need to be doing, I need to be playing, I need to be pretty, I need to be. And you look at the labels that we have in our media and social media and the news and magazines, and everything is creating this filter that says, I don't look like that, I'm not that. And what if I can't find a box? Because think about how damaging that is too. If everybody's got a label, if everybody's got this container that we can hide behind, what happens when you don't fit in any container? And this was one of the things I struggled with for a good part of my life. I felt like everybody kept trying to put me in a box, and I felt like, good morning, Alan. I felt like there wasn't a box that I fit in, right? I felt like, good morning, Kay. Labeling ourselves with our inner voice, right? Yes, it's that space that responds to fight or flight. It's that space that responds to the programming and the beliefs that have been handed down. And I think about the boy-girl labels, right? Yeah, I get fired up about that too. I get so fired up about what we're teaching our kids from the minute we bring them into this world. And we're still very polarized in, boys should be this, girls should be this. This is the label that they wear. And I'm like, how limiting is that when you have opportunities to let kids define who they are? And if we see the individual, and this is where I get really hung up on a lot. There's so many labels right now. We have so polarized ourselves with all of the, well, we're this group. It's one of the things I struggle with even in corporate. And I get the idea of it. And what I think is missing is it's not a collective conversation. It's an isolation. Even ERG groups, employee research groups in corporate. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, we're not including a bigger conversation. We're putting a group of people that look alike that come from similar backgrounds in a group together to talk about their issues, which oftentimes, and I've been a part of some of those ERG groups, it's a place for further commiseration. It's a place to continue the frustration, to play the blame game, to be the victim. And there's not a conversation to bring people to the table to understand what it's like to be from a different background, or what it's like to come from a different race or religion or culture or sexuality. We're still oftentimes creating these containers that say, and we say, oh, you're invited in, even if you don't look like this, or even if you don't, you're not this kind of label. And the majority of people aren't stepping forward in that space. So what we're doing is, even though the intention is to create a space to put a spotlight on how diverse and how different and our opportunity for inclusion, I often feel like what we're doing is we're further polarizing the situation and the conversation, because there's still a label around it. There's a label that says, you're this, I'm this. We have our playgrounds we play in, and sometimes we're going to come together and share things, but for any other sake and purpose, we're going to keep ourselves isolated and separate. And again, my personal opinion around that, I feel like there's so much more work to do in the D&I space that's really about having meaningful conversations. And I remember I got together with a couple friends of mine when I was back doing some corporate training in DC, and I got together with two of my friends who are just huge advocates in the diversity and inclusion space, and we were talking about the power of labels and how damning it be, because think about even in a race, right? Then you got too dark, too light, too mixed, too this, too whatever, and we further put labels inside the original label, which further creates isolation. Anytime we're putting, and it's interesting, Robin, that's a great question, and that's my question. Are all labels negative? Are all labels, are there any? And so this is a conversation I just want to have. This is something that was, have a great day, Terry. This is something that literally is just, it's a question in my mind. I'm curious, are there any labels that serve? Think about even the fact, and I'm gonna put some hard labels out there, and I love the distinction that this article said. It was talking about even something when you say, someone murdered someone. And I'm going to get really into a deep space here for a minute. And it said right away we label them as a murderer versus someone who made a choice to murder someone in that moment. And it's the space of, do we label the person and the individual, or do we look at the actual action and call that out where their responsibility is being required? And when you think about Carol Dweck's work and mindset, when you think about fixed versus growth mindset, it's never about the individual. It's about the activity, the effort, the output, the decision, the choice, the whatever, which is what we create the frame around, versus immediately people make mistakes, right? And I'm not condoning, by the way, let me just be really clear. I'm not condoning that someone that does something like that, and there's always a bigger story around something, right? Because do we immediately assume someone fits in a box because they made a choice that was a bad decision at a certain time? And I'm gonna use an example of that. And yes, this is gonna be a little bit of a punchy example, but I love this show. And I just watched season 4, I think it's season 4, which I wish it would be longer, but I just finished watching Queer Eye season 4 on Netflix. Love that show, love that show, love that show. And there was an episode where a man was paralyzed in a chair due to a violent act when he was younger. It was basically a gang situation, and he got shot going to his car. He was running with gangs, he was playing, making bad decisions, and he was having an argument with a former girlfriend or a friend, I can't remember, and for some reason a gun was pulled on him and he was shot, which was what paralyzed him. Fast forward through the show as he was working through his own, he now has a nonprofit that is all about disabled, not really, that's what it's called, it's in Kansas City, and he now is a spokesperson for healing and space and whatever. And so Karaba, one of the guys on Queer Eye, was talking to him about what he needs for the healing. He said, I still have a question as to why I got shot. He's like, I never had an interaction with the guy that shot me. And so Karaba asked permission to see if he would be open to it. But what happened was that he had an interaction because the guy that shot him served time. And, now it's like, 15 years later, and he was out, from serving his time. And so he had the two of them connect. And at first I was like, oh, that's a scary situation, right? and the conversation that ensued. Oh my God, the conversation that these two gentlemen had about their mindset and what they thought was going on. And he said, dude, you had a gun. We had a gun. We were running with gangs, and it was a space of not knowing and protecting your own. And it was a whole turf space. And I saw this and made a judgment of this. And you had your boys in the car, all of this stuff. Right. And it was a big conversation that they just had. And it was all tied up in the labels that they had created, that the outcome of this conversation was not only incredible forgiveness, but it was an opportunity that they said there might be something that we do together to have a bigger voice on why we need to break down these stereotypes, why we need to break down these labels. And, you know, he said, without this incident, I wouldn't be doing this in my life right now. And it's right, that space of life happens for you. And I think about, there was a movie on Netflix that's called I Am the Same as Different, whatever it was. It has Renee Zellweger. It has, I can't think of his name, that beautiful man. Anyway, there was a space where, a true story about how, you know, a homeless man and a woman and her husband and friend become friends. And it's, anyway, the whole point is that we have this opportunity to break down those stereotypes and those labels. And I think about, there's a story of, you know, a father whose son was shot by another father's son, that the two of them now are out there doing work together to talk about the healing space of having those conversations. And so I don't know, Robin, I don't know if there's any labels that are serving. As I think about those stories, as I think about incidents that happen inside of them, I think about, I haven't seen a label that has truly been serving. I feel like labels in any way, shape, or form are limiting. Anytime we put somebody in a container or box, versus looking at the person as a whole, I feel like we're creating a space where we're not seeing the whole picture, where we don't know the true story. And labels are a way that we keep ourselves safe, and I understand that. And sometimes maybe they do serve because we're in a situation that says, okay, I need to protect myself first. Yes, and so I don't know. I'm curious what the rest of you think. Is that yes, label the, you know, are we labeling the person, or are we labeling the choice or the decision? And I would like to focus more on the choices, the outcomes, the effort that's put forward versus the person as a whole. Because I know there are things that I've done in my life that would be easy for someone to judge me, and they have, that were bad decisions but didn't make me a bad person. They were decisions I made out of fear. They were decisions I made out of hurting, out of feeling shame, but don't ultimately make me a bad person. They made me, they were bad decisions I made based on circumstances in my life. And it's not an excuse. It's a reality looking back that I take full responsibility for those decisions. And I know in my heart who I am as a person. And if I were to be labeled just by that one choice or those couple choices, how different my life would be, right? And so you bet that boys must do certain activities because they're boys, and girls must do certain activities. Absolutely. That labeling, that box drives me crazy, right? Grown up boys were shepherded to math and science. I wish I would have been, for example. Yeah, there's a lot of limiting, right? And so there's a space, and the reason I'm bringing this up is I think about what's going on right now in our country. And, you know, I like to have the big conversation, and I get some people are like, ooh, this is too much for a Tuesday morning, Candy. It's 7:30, right? Yes, and when do we have these conversations? When do we start to think about our responsibility in the conversation that's being had, our role in how we're contributing to creating these labels? And like I said, I absolutely have caught myself making an assessment, making an instant judgment, which, by the way, is a label. It's a box I put somebody in based on what I perceive with my eyes or what I perceive with my hearing or something else. Now, there are spaces where your body knows if something is a real threat to you. So your body knows, your intuition, by all means, trust that. And I don't care what kind of label you have to put on. If you're in an unsafe situation, you call it whatever you need to do because you know intuitively when something is not right for you. And then there's other times where it's just your mind, it's your programming, it's whatever color or filter you're looking through, that you are creating a space to not connect with somebody because maybe they're a little disheveled. Maybe they're a little bit, you know, they look different than you. Maybe they're a different size than you. I mean, think about how much we label people that are thin versus fat versus this versus that. Really, really. Because some of those people that we perceive looking one way, man, if we were to pull back the curtain and look at what they're doing to themselves in order to create that result, is that really what we want for ourselves? How do we create that space? And all of this starts with a space of self-love. It starts with the space to know who you are, to not let someone else's labels of you. And I get that. I get people that want to label me constantly. I get things like, Candy, you're aggressive, you're intimidating, you're this. And sometimes I just find that hilarious. I'm 5'2", and seriously, are you kidding me? And that's not my issue. That's not mine. And to Yvette's point, I don't have time for that, right? I don't have time to worry about what box people want to put me in. And I'm going to talk about that another day, about what I call the two box, which is the space of people that want to say you're to this, you're to that, and how it actually is your strengths and your gifts. And it's what scares people. But I get people that want to put me in a box all the time. As most of you probably feel that. And there's a space to say, I need to know who I am without the labels, but more from a contextual, these are the characteristics, these are the qualities I choose to emulate. These are the things based on how I define them. And for those of you that have been doing the Yes Monthly, we've been spending a lot of time talking about how you define certain terms and certain things in your life, because when you choose to take ownership, and here's that growth mindset again, when you choose to take ownership of how you qualify something, how you define something, then when you say, I'm this kind of person, it's not as much of a label as it is an ownership of, this is the qualities, this is the traits, this is the space I want to emulate, and this is how I take responsibility, because for me, this has meaning. And so when I say something like I'm a teacher, or I say something that, my 3 words when we do our standards of integrity, I talk about courage, authenticity, and generosity. And those so maybe to your point, Robin, maybe those are labels, they're classifications, and because of the way I define them, and because they have meaning for me, because they represent something I want to emulate in everything that I do, those may be an example of labels that serve, because I have taken time to define those for myself. I have taken time to say, these are the way that I choose to show up every day and the way I choose to serve. And so maybe that's an example of where labels do work. It's that classification of what you want to emulate and how you want to stand up. And it's the labels you choose for yourself versus the labels you allow others to impose on you. And so maybe that's an example of where labels really work. I prefer to put candy in a bucket. Nice try, Herbie. You know me too well. And so there is no such thing. Candy doesn't fit in a box or a bucket or any other kind of container out there. And this has made me very frustrating for a lot of people. They want to, and so if I were to have a label, it would be this like mile-long label that's like, well, I'm this today and this tomorrow and whatever. And that's okay too, right? And so yes, Robin, absolutely. The key is in your ownership. And I think that's a powerful way to kind of bring this full circle is, all of this comes back to your own personal responsibility. And when we talk about leadership, right, we talk about leadership being a function of how you choose to show up, a function of how you choose to serve, and a function of how you choose to take personal responsibility inside those 2 spaces. And, oh, thank you so much, Herbie. Those are the space where you go, if I own this, and it's just like your choices. Here's the thing, any choice you make, and that was one of the things that was so powerful about some of those healing conversations, is both those gentlemen took responsibility for their role in that situation. Both those gentlemen said, I can see where you would have thought that. I can see if I were the roles reversed, I might have pulled my gun in and defended my posse as well, without even thinking, without even asking, because we were taught that, that puts us at risk. And so when you think about that, there's a responsibility. There's a place of ownership. And at the end of the day, everything that we talk about is an ownership, right? It's a choice. And when you recognize the power of choice, the power for how you choose to classify or qualify yourself, the power of what you're doing in terms of the labels and the filters you're creating, and taking a responsibility to say, am I shutting down a conduit for communication, for connection? Am I not allowing myself? So I want you to really think about, so for today, my challenge or invitation for you is to think about, where are you inadvertently closing down a path for connection? Where are you closing down based on, and we all have them. Every day I work harder to open myself up to be more present and available for the people around me. I have met some of the most amazing people when I've cut through the bullshit and the labels that have either been handed down to me or things that I think are from a safety standpoint. And I check in and I'm like, do I really feel like my safety is at risk? No. Then step forward and connect with this human being. They're a human being first. And if I want to put a label on anybody, it's that they are a human being. They are a spiritual being, that they are a powerful child of God, and that is the only label that I want to put out there. And when I can shift my mindset and take ownership in that space, I am then able to build a bigger path, a bigger bridge to healing conversations, to connection, real connection, meaningful connection, and courageous conversations. And so I want to challenge you to explore today. Notice where you're instantly making a judgment, where you're instantly like, ooh, that person. I want you to think, I want you to really be present today in where, because I guarantee even those of you that have shown up and said, I don't do labels, yes, we do. We all do them, myself included. And it is a practice every day that I try to enhance how to be more present in that filter, in what I receive, in what I'm experiencing and observing and hearing around me. And it's why I curate so much of what I watch, what I hear, what I bring in. I want you to really invite and challenge yourself to stand up and be more present in your own language, whether it's your own thoughts. And by the way, a label doesn't have to be something you say out loud. It can be a thought that you hold on to, and you start to go a direction and you're like, nope, I'm going to back up. Want you to be mindful of where that's creating a barrier instead of a bridge in terms of your opportunity to really connect. And so thank you all. I appreciate that. I am is a complete sentence, right? We all are I am. We are all I am, a part of the greater I am. And I love that when you think about that. I smile, make contact, and say hi, yeah, right? And if someone else has a judgment about you, then let that be their judgment. But let yourself be open. Let yourself be the healing light the world needs. Let yourself seek for connection and take responsibility in how you're showing up and serving in that space. As much as I try not to, I label, but try not to. And so it's about creating that presence, being more mindful in that space. Are you going to get it right every time? No. We have a lot of programming. We have years and years and years of programming. And for many of us, we have generations of programming. And that's not an excuse. That's an opportunity to continue to lean in and say, do I really want to believe this? Do I want to? And so look for ways to forge, to bridge those opportunities for deeper connection. And so I really appreciate all of you jumping into this conversation. Like I said, I had a little bit of a this morning, really, Candy, you're going to get into labels this morning. You're going to talk about this conversation. And it felt like something that I wanted to open up. I don't think this is the first time we're going to have this conversation. I think there's a bigger conversation. And I love how all of you show up here willing to roll up your sleeves, to dig in, to be vulnerable, to put the questions out there. Because here's the thing, just because I'm saying and putting this out here doesn't mean I have all the answers. And I do think Robin asked a great question. Is there any time that a label serves? And I think that's a question for all of us to ask. And again, I think when I can label myself with the qualities that are meaningful for me, maybe that's the only time that a label or a classification serves, because it gives me a GPS, it gives me a direction to head towards so that I can measure myself every day to say, did I show up in that space? So it may not be that all labels are bad. And where are labels getting in your way to creating that bridge for communication and connection? Oh, thank you so much, Robin. I appreciate that. Good, because that one was one of those that was like in my stomach for sure. And I really want to delve into this more. I think this is a big conversation for us to have. And I want to stop polarizing the conversation. And I mean collectively as our culture. I want us to lean in and get into some of the scary stuff that most people aren't talking about. Because even with the vibration we create here, we're creating healing that we can put into the world. And I really believe that is our mission, that collectively we get to eradicate that cycle of fear. This isn't on me to do alone. This is me in a community, in a tribe that's out there understanding that what we've been taught, what we believe is not serving to move us forward, is not creating the healing, the opportunity. All it's doing is further polarizing and putting us in a space that feels kind of stuck, right? Yvette, thank you. Awesome, thought-provoking. Awesome. I just love you guys. And Robin, just want to let you know, I saw your message. I owe you some stuff. I will get that out to you hopefully today or tomorrow. So please forgive me. I thought I had sent that and realized that I dropped the ball on that. So I do apologize. I owe you something back. And so I will finish that and get that to you. So thank you again for that opportunity. And thank you all. Thank you all for participating in the conversation. I think, you know, there's so much opportunity for us to have some deeper conversations. And like I said, if there's things you want me to draw some light to, ask the question, pose it in this group, facilitate the discussion, let me know, because this is an open forum. I want this space to be our space to facilitate these meaningful conversations, these ways to help us move forward in our leadership, in our ability to heal, and in our ability to really create deeper connection, because there's never been a time we need that more. So everybody, I love you. Herbie, as part of communicating, I would throw in the labels, help others triangulate on where you see yourself. Ooh, that's a really powerful comment to kind of absorb and reflect on. I may come back to that one. I really like that question. That's an interesting perspective, and really just I can feel that and feel like that might even be a whole nother coffee chat. Wow, that's yeah, let's think about that one. I like that, Herbie. Thank you for sharing that. God, that one's like my brain. I can feel the hamster starting to go crazy in my brain right now on that one. I think we're going to have to come back and open that one up. I want to talk a little bit more about where we triangulate things. And yeah, that's an interesting, thank you, Herbie. Robin, perfect. And I want to share something with you, this group, this morning quickly. I am considering a documentary on this topic. I made a move last year to experience more of this purposely. As we go along, maybe I can bring you all into the conversation. Oh, Robin, that's wonderful. Oh, that just makes my heart sing. I will say for me, that's a 1000% yes. I would be very interested in coming forth and being part of your community, have this conversation. I love that. Wow. This is why this group is so amazing to me. The thought leadership and the directive and the way that you all are leaning into your lives and leaning into your leadership, it truly just really speaks to my heart. And I feel so honored and blessed to be in tribe with you, to be in this space with you. And so, Robin, that is a yes for me, 1000%. The rest of you feel free to respond to Robin. Let her know if you would be interested in that conversation as well. Like I said, speaking of connection, please, I know some of you, as I see you say hi to each other in the morning, please connect with each other outside of this. There's so much connection and opportunity to learn from each other. I'm just one facilitator in this conversation. There's so much each of you bring to the table, and I'm deeply humbled and deeply honored to be in this tribe with all of you. And so thank you, Robin, for that share. Thank you, all of you. Thank all of you for going so deep and being wide open in this conversation. And I have no idea what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. I kind of wake up with whatever is in my heart, and we just kind of take it from there. And so I love you all, and truly feel blessed to have you in my life. And so I hope you go out and make it a very intentional Tuesday. Be very mindful of the labels that you're creating, and really find more opportunities today to lean in to the power of connection. Connect with somebody that maybe you normally wouldn't, and allow yourself to experience something really new, something open, and something that could change your life forever. So with that, everybody, I love you so much. And I will be back tomorrow at 7:30 a.m. Central Time for another coffee chat. Till then, I will talk to you later.